Unimpeachable, that's what I am. Should I be taking such a serious measure as this so lightly? Yes, absolutely I should. This is what happens when you use impeachment as any other political trick of the week. If you want to keep a running score, and if you want to be correct, technically impeachment is the idea of bringing charges. Removal from office is the conviction. So I'm aware of the difference, but we're going to go with the common usage and say he was not impeached. So currently, as of mid-February 2021, the score in terms of evading conviction on an acquittal is the Republicans are 2-0 and the Democrats are 1-1. And the Republicans continue to build their lead, looking strong going into next season, a rebuilding year, and I think the team's got a lot of things. Question is, can the quarterback come back after having a tough year and sustain some injuries, but he's got some time to recover, and we're not playing next week? Yeah, let's turn the whole thing into a giant game-by-game analysis, just another one of the 200 sports updates for the next week in terms of what is actually happening in the nation's capital. That's really what it's turned into, right? A farce. Just a farce. Something to joke around about, something to kid about, something silly and frivolous. And I'm also old enough to remember the Watergate hearings. But what I do remember about it was serious. And what I remember about it was that everybody was tense. I remember my father watching it for hours and being very concerned about it. He'd met Richard Nixon a number of times. Richard Nixon's vacation house was on Key Biscayne, Florida, where I grew up, and my dad was a hotel manager at the Sonesta Beach there. So he had a chance to make the hotel available for President Nixon few occasions when he wanted to have a small event or something. And he was deeply concerned about this and very unhappy about it. And so I guess I was too. I didn't understand what was going on. So there was actual unimpeachable evidence for that. Unimpeachable evidence. That's the term I like. That's what I'm going with today. Unimpeachable evidence means that there's no... You can't remove the evidence from its place in the center of the trial. The evidence is unimpeachable. It cannot be touched. That's what the word means. It is solid credibility. Unimpeachable means you have such rock solid credibility that the facts are unimpeachable. They're not up for discussion. So what does all this mean? What's the actual outcome of this? You do have to wonder why impeachment began in the first place, the first impeachment trial on the so-called Russian collusion issue and the Ukrainian call. You have a Mueller investigation lasts for 2 years, comes back with no evidence, no actionable evidence, no legally sustainable evidence of wrongdoing, and you have the impeachment trial, and you know that the Senate is not going to vote to convict. So why do you do it? Well, in the first case, the first time around, Nancy Pelosi did it out of vindictiveness. She wanted to put an asterisk next to Donald Trump's name. But Trump was acquitted. His defenders could then say none of these charges were proven. He was acquitted of the charges. So if the first one was a win for Donald Trump and she got her asterisks next to his name, then why do a second one on flimsier evidence and so on? Why? Well, I think there's a couple reasons. First of all, I think she wanted a second little asterisk next to Donald Trump. Now he's the only American president in history who's been impeached twice. Well, here's the newsflash for you, Nancy, and I don't know if you thought this one all the way through, but he's also the first American president in history to be acquitted twice. He's won twice. He's beaten you twice. When you go to court and you are trying to seek a conviction against somebody and the jury rules not guilty, that's a loss for you. That's a loss for you if you're a prosecuting attorney. So you were 0-1, Nancy, and now you're 0-2. And there's that aspect of it. But I suspect that the emotional reasons for this second impeachment go much deeper than that. I maintain, and I've seen the damage that continues to be done on a daily basis, that this Capitol riot I used to think it was an unmitigated disaster. Now I think it's a mitigated disaster. It is certainly given the Democrats a lot of leverage and a lot of video evidence, which is the only kind of evidence that counts today in terms of swinging public opinion. I am fully aware of all of the provocateurs. I'm fully aware of all of the shenanigans and the guards and all of it. I get all of it. But whatever actually happened, you see, in early 21st century America, it doesn't matter what really happened. What matters is what happened on camera. And you may not like it, and I certainly don't, but that is the reality of the world we live in today. What are the optics of it? When you no longer have the ability to communicate with people, when you no longer have the ability to reach them through a lengthy editorial that they might read or something like that, when everybody's schedule is so compressed that the only news they get consists of 5 or 10-second bites, then since a picture is in fact worth 1,000 words, and since every video image consists of 30 frames a second, you're putting out millions of words in a 5-second clip. So the damage that Capitol raid did is something that is going to be used against conservatives forever. And I don't think that game was worth the candle. I said I used to think it was an unmitigated disaster. Now I think it's a mitigated one. Here's the mitigation for me. I think the events of January 6th really genuinely scared them, all of them, inside the Beltway. I think it genuinely scared them. And while I'm going to stand by my statement that the damage done is far greater than any gain, it is still nevertheless very important and very valuable for the government to be afraid of the people. And this leads us to the final conclusion here on Unimpeachable Day. This message goes out to Democratic politicians and to Republicans who voted for this conviction. If you deprive a free people of the ballot box, or if you conduct yourself in such a way that a significant percent of the population, pushing 50%, no longer believes in the integrity of elections. In other words, if you have so far destroyed Americans' belief in the ballot box and done nothing to rectify that, then violence will be the inevitable outcome. That's what causes violent revolutions. When people no longer feel that they have a voice in their government and they are being mistreated and abused and humiliated and all the rest, and every single one of these things is magnified by, in fact, it's encapsulated by the second impeachment proceedings. The president's out of office. How can you remove a president that's already out of office? But that doesn't matter to them, you see. What they're doing is, there's a term that I don't recommend you look up. And some of you will know what it means and others not, but I'm going to say it anyway. In online gaming, when you're playing against other human players and you make a kill on somebody, especially if it's somebody who you've had a running combat with and maybe they've killed you a few times and you've genuinely got your blood up, then there's a procedure called teabagging. Don't look it up. But basically what it consists of is going over the opposing character and basically squatting on his face. And it's a form of humiliation. It's a taunt. It's exactly what it is. It's a taunt. And that's what the second impeachment was. It was a taunt. It was a taunt to the Trump supporters. It was a taunt to the people who thought that you could get up on your hind legs and determine who was actually going to be ruling the country. And so that, I think, is part of their motivation too, is the taunt. But I do genuinely think that this event on January 6th really did genuinely scare them. And they need to be aware of the fact that this is not something that people will put up with forever. I like to think that Americans are less tolerant of this kind of taxation without representation or impeachment without representation or governance or election or whatever. But anywhere around the world, anywhere throughout history, what you find is that when people have been denied the legitimate exercise of their voice and their will, then they will eventually resort to non-legitimate means. And that's why playing around with election integrity, you may think gets you some short-term wins. And they do. But in the long term, you're not going to like the price that you will have to pay for it if it doesn't get corrected. I'd like to see it corrected very much. I don't want to see what happens in this country when people reach a level of anger because they are utterly convinced that they are now not only being governed illegally, but the people who are governing them illegally, immorally, unethically, childishly, petulantly, when a people realize that those rulers are not only illegitimate or appear to be illegitimate, but they are also actually rubbing the faces of regular people into the dirt to remind them of their status and their place, then bad things start to happen to the people who take that attitude on top. And that's just history. That's simply just history talking. This is the result of what happens when you deprive people of their lawful, rightful voice. And when you deprive lawful, just, decent, honest people with honor and integrity, when you deprive them of their voice and humiliate and insult them, there's only so much of that people are going to take. So I would just simply say, you may think that being able to have, let's just say, generous election laws provides you an opportunity to win elections either legally or immorally, because if you're not really counting registered voters, it's still cheating. So if you think that's the path to victory, then what you're saying is that your policies would not win in a fair election. If you are so intent on making voting as fraudable, I just made up a new word, as possible, if your entire political purpose is to register as many illegal voters as you possibly can, that could be illegal aliens, people who are not qualified to vote because they're felons or they're underage or they dead. If your entire theory is that you have to cheat to win, then what you're basically saying is that your policies will not survive a fair vote. Your policies are not popular enough to win a 50.1% majority. And so what you're really saying is that the policies you're trying to inflict upon the people that have supposedly elected you are not policies that they want, but you're going to enforce them anyway. And if you have to cheat, or if you have to manipulate the news, or if you have to do all of this stuff to do what you have to do, then you need to understand right now that you are enforcing your will in a non-democratic way, and that you are continuing to divide and to anger and to stiffen the resolve of Americans who play by the rules, who are peaceful, law-abiding citizens, people who've never had a single mark on their criminal record. Their perp sheets don't run pages and pages. Virtually everybody I know has never had so much as a misdemeanor arrest. These are the people that you're angering, and these are the people that to some degree you're driving to violence. And I think it would be very good for the country, and it is my fond wish that you would stop these practices and go about immediately go about the process of restoring Americans' faith in the electoral system, whether cheating occurred or not. And I'm convinced it did. Half the country is convinced that it happened. If you think that benefits you, you're wrong. If I were you, I would go about restoring people's confidence in their voice being heard. Because if that happens, then America will remain a country of laws. And politicians will have nothing to fear, because honest people honestly lose elections. And when an election is held fairly and you lose the election, you submit to the rule. That's the game. That's how it's played. Those are the rules. Those are the rules. When you start changing the rules, or when you start selectively enforcing the rules, or when you start doing any number of other things, then don't be surprised if the other team starts committing fouls where they weren't committing fouls before, because this is not something that is going to end well for you. And Mr. Unimpeachable here has been a magnet for people who have felt that their government no longer belongs to them. And the one thing his presidency accomplished more than any other, more than the economic recovery, more than the initial enormous setback to China's plans for hegemony around the world, forget about the number of record-setting historical peace agreements he's brokered in the Middle East. of all of the things that Donald Trump's presidency accomplished, at least his first presidency, is that it has shown us just how committed progressive politicians, large numbers of the Democratic Party, I'm talking about party officials, big tech, the news media, entertainment, Hollywood, all of them, how openly disdainful they are of the idea of governance by the people, how openly disdainful they are of the idea of people making up their minds, how they brag in Time magazine about the ways that they managed to secure the country from the people having their own say. I would just strongly recommend that you do a little research on a woman named Marie Antoinette. That would be my final advice to you in the wake of Donald Trump's historic second victory. The unimpeachable president has now acquitted himself twice. The people who voted for him have acquitted themselves twice. The people who brought about these sham proceedings disgraced themselves, and then they disgraced themselves again. And that's the outcome of all of this. And now impeachment's a joke. And every president from this point forward will be impeached. And that's going to be a real problem when it comes time to take this seriously. And that is what you have wrought. And it is up to us, all of us together, to put this government back in the box that it came in, to restore these exercises of constitutional authority to their rightful place, to make it a last-ditch national tragedy where the entire nation, Republican and Democrat, as in the case of the Watergate hearings that I mentioned earlier, where every American is deeply wounded by the entire procedure, and a sense of great sadness fills the country on both sides of the aisles at the magnitude of what is about to happen. And it doesn't become a Packers versus Bears game with cheerleaders and mascots and all the rest of it, which is what the Democrats have turned this into. It's technically speaking a day of disgrace. Not for Donald Trump, who is, but for the United States. This is yet another mile marker along the road to hell on terms of how far we've come. And the problem with things like this is the further down this road we go, we realize that the alternative is to either continue on into darkness with no lantern to guide us into territory along a road that we know nothing about, or we can turn around and go back the way we came, and every single mile we go further down that road is another mile that we're going to have to backtrack to get back into the light where we belong and into the light that this country deserves.